So Deepak and Satya, thanks for taking time out for discussing what we call takeover tea. You've been working on the overall digital banking, focusing on figuring out where financial services is headed and kind of coming out with products and solutions to meet the requirements. Deepak, I'm really fascinated to kind of understand, while, as I said, you've been really working with a lot of banks across the globe, but you've also been quite focused in figuring out what's happening with the consumer internet companies, because they seem to be doing something right when it comes to customer experience, engagement, and the way customers are really hooked on to what is being offered through the digital channels. Is there something that you see that banks can kind of use from these consumer internet companies?
Yeah, Shani. So definitely, I think there are multiple things that we see these so-called consumer internet companies doing really right, or the famous FANG. When we look at the likes of Facebook's, Apple's, or Netflix, or Google's, there is a common denominator across few things that they do consistently. One, say for example, to call out is they don't do carpet bombing. Say for example, they understand that there are multiple segments with multiple needs, and then they ensure that they reach out to the specific needs across their experiences by personalizing. So that's one big dimension. Another dimension that we see is they do a lot of experimentation. Say for example, when they're launching new services or new features, they might not know what works or what do not work. So what they do is they do small scale experiments, see what is working and what is not working, then roll out the successful variants to all users. So that's one key thing that we see. And then the third thing that we see is the whole faster go-to-market. While it looks very simple and easy from a normal consumer standpoint, but within the bank's universe, that itself is a big leap. I think the famous examples that we can give is what Google Pay has done or what Paytm Money has done. The speed or the rate at which they are launching new services, features with the right experiences ensure that the traction is really, really good. So I think overall I believe this faster go-to-market and then the ability to do the personalization with a bit of experimenting can really help banks work and operate like the consumer internet companies and then cater to the consumer needs much better.
Understand. I'll come back to you, especially talking about how they orchestrate various complex transactions. But before that, Satya, banks operate in those so-called traditional, of course, they're changing and changing for good, but data centers, owning the computers, the servers, etc. And the consumer internet is really talking about working on a cloud, working across geographies. So what is happening in a consumer internet company? Do you think can also work in terms of technology for banks?
Yeah, I mean, from that point of view, Srini, definitely what consumer internet companies have been able to do in terms of offering all these things that Deepak mentioned. So banks can also do this. So the so-called being cloud native, providing the auto scaling functionality, which were ideally part of the cloud providers domain. With the advent of Kubernetes, Docker, so banks can easily adopt all those technologies and provide a similar experience deploying the applications in their own data centers or private clouds. So auto scaling is something that was a feature of cloud providers. So with Dockers and Kubernetes in play, with the container orchestration, auto scaling is something that can be done with the click of a button now, even in data centers.
So I think what you've said is quite interesting, because I was told that Kubernetes can work as much on a bare metal. So it's really about picking up the best practices and utilizing it because of regulatory purposes. They need to work in data centers, so be it. Deepak, coming and sticking on to the topic of consumer internet companies, what I've kind of observed is that they've been able to kind of work with multiple ecosystem entities, but it looks so simple when it kind of is rendered to us. Similarly, in banking, we're really talking about customers having accounts, for example, savings account, you could have a loan, you could have a card. Do you think there's something that banks can learn the way these services are rendered by the consumer internet companies?
Yeah, so definitely there is a thing or two that banks can definitely take from consumer internet companies, because if we really see how the systems play that is operated in both consumer internet companies and banks, it is more or less the same. Banks also have the same set of multiple host systems, as we call, as similar to, say, for example, what Netflix has got today. There are multiple host systems. So at least what we see is there are elements of orchestration or workflows that comes into picture that can integrate with these multiple systems and then facilitate the digitization of new services or new use cases to be built much faster. And it's not entirely new for banks, because we see some banks, at least the banks at the top of the digital maturity, have already have started adopting the similar practices. So I think it's just a matter of time before the other banks also continue the same footsteps and then get the right orchestrations or the workflows in place.
Got it. Satya, sticking on to the workflows that Deepak talked about, while again banks have evolved, talking about APIs, etc. According to you, this is what you're working and what you're trying to build. What is required in the back end to ensure that the ability to ensure the orchestration happens soon, and I'm sure there are different languages and protocols that are associated for multiple backends. How do you ensure that you render cross-channel to customers seamlessly?
Yeah. So there are multiple factors involved in providing a seamless experience. Generally banks systems are either, mostly legacy, and there are some modern systems as well. So understanding, we have to build a layer which understands the legacy systems, the legacy protocols, different message formats, different type of interfaces, and then provide a way to quickly configure a new service. There's a business requirement for a service. Understanding the business requirement, ability to create a new service, leveraging the existing legacy systems, the APIs, different kinds of APIs, different message formats is very important, right? So once we do that, then understanding the context of the user across different channels, different devices, different interfaces, understanding these, having a ability to build a service and then understanding the context will help banks to provide seamless experiences and also faster go-to market in terms of conceptualizing a new service and rolling it out.
Understood.
Deepak, adding one point here, I think again when we look the comparison between the consumer internet and banks here, I think at least banks do have some advantages because there is pretty much some sort of standardization when it comes to when we speak of card payment flows or when we speak of remittance flows. At least there are universally accepted standards as compared to any other consumer internet company. So I think it should be more easier, and then we can expect more traction to happen here.
Interesting. We keep hearing about this banks called the challenger banks, the neo banks, and that the current banks are going to die, and because they become the dinosaurs, they're slow. Considering the fact that our products and technologies are focused to work with the universal banks, pretty much focused on retail and SME side of it for starters, what do you think these new and challenger banks are really all about? And more importantly, what do the retail banks or the retail and SME banks need to do to counter the threat of these new age tech companies?
Yeah, so two things here. I think one thing, at least I would say from a consumer point of view, is at least the challenger banks have shown what is possible in a typical financial space. Because at least there were some doubts on if a financial entity can ever operate at the speed of a Netflix or a Hotstar or a Amazon. But at least those doubts have been completely removed by the new challenger banks now. And the incumbent banks have actually taken notice of what the challenger banks were able to achieve. And thanks to some support from, or rather I would say some push from the regulatory bodies also, where most of the central bodies are also pushing the incumbent banks to up their game, either by opening up the APIs or the open banking thing that we typically see happening across. So yeah, I think the possibility is definitely there. And then the incumbent banks have taken notice. I think they're investing significantly enough to get the right systems or right the platforms in place so that they can really match the scale and speed of operations of a fintech or incumbents. And then the second point is, again, when we speak of from a consumer standpoint, the trust element that the consumer still has got, where he would really want to store or take his money. I think that's where the incumbent banks has got a lot of benefit over any other challengers or neobanks. While we see in some segments there are challenger banks taking some success, but overall, at least me, my parents or anyone in general, they still want to retain their relationship with the standard incumbent bank. And as long as the banks up their game, I don't think the incumbent banks are going anywhere.
Understand. But in terms of offering by these banks, new basis which you're building the products, what are those one or two differentiators according to you that could help them?
So again, yeah. So the very first thing is, I think this whole seamless experience across all channels itself. Again, while it looks simple, itself is a big jump. Again, the closest example I can give from the non-bank use cases is today. Today you can start your Netflix, some TV series on your laptop, and then when you hop on to your Uber or Ola, you can continue the same thing on your mobile. So inherently, the continuity across channels is already there. And then I think that's the first thing that most of the banks are already in the process of doing or already doing it. So that's one. The second thing is, again, the speed at which they're able to digitize or launch new services. Again, I think if you see the last couple of years, the most popular use case is the digital onboarding. The ability for consumers to open a bank account from any of the digital channel itself has propelled a lot of unbanked users onto the banking segment right now. So that is from I think the whole aspects around digitizing and launching a service as quickly as possible across all channels while maintaining the seamlessness is a big difference from what the banks are already doing today. On top of that, as I already said earlier, the aspects of personalization, because with the scale comes different segments, and with the different segment comes multiple needs. So that single stick approach will definitely not work. I think it's high time for the banks to really, on the same mobile banking or internet banking, the ability for the bank to create differential experiences in runtime or in real time would be of utmost essence if they have to beat the competition from the challenger banks.
Interesting. Satya, I kind of took out 2 points from what Deepak just mentioned. Keen to understand how you're going to render it technically. One is kind of talk about, especially from a bank, the whole monolith, the way things have been, and non-APIs. But suddenly now we talk about microservices and the so-called reusability. Do you see something worth it there? And the second question, to what Deepak just mentioned about the personalization, do you see something on the configuration, especially especially in the front end, the app frameworks being going out of vogue because of the native apps being the requirement? But then how will I ensure the configurability and the configs is what you call are rendered? What are you doing now?
So the aspect of personalization, I mean, if I have to take an example, I mean, when I log in a service, the view or the front end that I see and the other person logs into that service, the front end or the view that he sees has to be different. That is a level of personalization wherein I want to see a different kind of experience every time I log in myself, right? So that requires a lot of kind of customizations or configurability that needs to be built in the front end, or the front end UI or the app. So we need to start thinking about what are those aspects which changes from one person to other person, from situation to situation, understanding the context, and then start configuring those things from the beginning and have a platform which will help the BizOps team or the product team to decide on the values or the experiences they want to give for those specific context and understanding the user behavior.
Deepak and Satya, thanks a lot for taking time out, and hopefully you'll kind of build on what you're doing even more.